Welcome to session 10. We've been looking at a couple of issues in the urban area. We're now focusing on social problems. To begin with, we have to provide a definition as usual. A social problem is a negative phenomenon which has become so widespread that it has become a concern to the majority of the people who then call for something to be done about it. Now, if you look at that definition, what do you think could be a social problem in the urban community? A negative phenomenon which has become so widespread that it affects the majority of the people who then call for something to be done about it. Without hesitating, you could suggest armed robbery. Armed robbery is a negative phenomenon. It leads to robbery of legitimate earnings of people. Sometimes they get hurt. It's negative. It is widespread. Recently, if you read the newspapers, armed robbery is so much on the increase. It's of concern to all of us. We are calling on the government, please do something about this. So that's a typical social problem. Prostitution can be a problem as well if you look at it as being negative in terms of the fact that it transmits sexually transmitted infections, and that is widespread. There are so many girls into prostitution, and then it's of concern to the society, and they say, please find jobs for the girls to do so that prostitution would minimize. So that's how we look at what constitutes a social problem. In discussing social problems, we usually focus on social deviance. And in discussing social deviance, we normally focus on crime, because crime is the worst of all deviations. Now, what is social deviance? Social deviance simply refers to deviation from the norms of society, or breaking the norms of society. Now, what are the norms? The norms are rules regulating our behavior. What the rules do, the rules identify specific situations and prescribe the kind of behavior appropriate to those situations. Let's take marriage. Marriage is a situation, and a rule will identify the situation of getting married and then prescribe the kind of behavior appropriate to getting married. For example, you don't have the urge to satisfy your sex drive, and then you see a girl in the street and you grab her and make love to her in the street. Or you don't want to get married, and then you see a woman or a girl in the street and you grab her, seize her, take her to your home, make love to her, and then you start calling her your wife. No. The rule says that to get married, you have to identify the girl first. You have to woo her. In the process of wooing her, if she agrees to be your friend, you develop a relationship. And then at a certain point in the relationship, you propose to her, will you marry me? When she says yes, then you have to go and speak to your parents, and then your parents will have to see, you have to go and see the parents of the girl and present to them your desire to get married to the girl. And then the parents of the girl would normally carry out some investigations into your background, and if they're satisfied, then they say, okay, we agree. So that is the rule you have to go through. So rules identify specific situations, and they prescribe the kind of behavior appropriate to that situation. So that definition of social deviance as a deviation from the norms of society or the breaking of the rules of society is not found to be acceptable by other writers on the topic. In other words, there's no universally accepted definition of social deviance. So there has been 4 different approaches to the definition of the concept. We have the statistical approach, we have the legal approach, we have the pathological approach, we have the sociological approach to the definitions as well. Now let's look at these definitions very quickly and point out the weaknesses. Statistically, a person is said to be deviant if his behavior varies too widely from the norm or the average. Anything that varies widely from the norm or average is said to be statistically deviant. For example, I wish that there was a board here. I could do a diagrammatic demonstration of this, but let's assume that my hand here represents the norm. It's a straight line. And those above the line, the people above this line here are above average people. And the people below the line here are below average people. Now, if we characterize the people above the average here as saints, because their behavior is above average, they are so good people, professionals, they do so well, we call them saints. We can characterize the people below the average here as sinners, because their behavior is so bad, they are below average, they're criminals, they're armed robbers, etc., etc., etc. Now, the statistical definition says that anything that varies from the average or norm is statistically deviant. That means that the saints here who are above average and the sinners here who are above average are equally deviant. That, of course, is not acceptable. You can't equate saints and sinners and lump them together as equally deviant. That is the major weakness of the statistical definition. There's a legal definition of social deviance because some deviations are crimes. And what is a crime? Simply defined, a crime is any action or inaction which violates the provisions of the criminal legislation and is punishable. Or if you look at a much more precise definition suggested by Haskell and Jablonski, a crime is an intentional act committed or omitted in violation of a law forbidding or commanding it, and to which is annexed either of the following punishments, like the death penalty, imprisonment, imposition of fines, removal from office, or disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit in a society. That is the legal definition of social deviance. But you look at that definition and say, but this is dealing with crimes only. What about deviations which are non-criminal? For example, if a woman were to go to the beach, normally the respected lady going to the beach is expected to come in bikinis, you know, the swimwear. When you find this lady going to the beach, she's dressed up in a maxi skirt. She's having a fashionable hat. She's wearing gloves. And she's wearing pointed shoes, high-heel shoes, to the beach. Obviously, that lady has deviated from wearing bikinis. But has she committed a crime? No. She has not committed a crime. People are only going to laugh at her. They'll point a finger at her, but she's broken no law. That was just a folk way that she has violated. So the legal definition is regarded as too narrow in a sense that it does not take into account those other deviations of the folk ways, the mores, and the behavioral practices of people. So it is too narrow. That is the weakness of the legal definition. You look at the pathological definition. This definition suggests that any deviant person is sick, is a sick person, in a sense that you could be psychotic, and because you're mentally abnormal, you commit a crime, or you're neurotic and you would deliberately commit a crime. So every crime or deviant behavior is a product of mental abnormality, or is regarded as, well, not acceptable. But if you meet some people who are perceived by society as abnormal mentally. And he asked them, we give the example of a person who is a homosexual or a gay person. If you met him and you suggested to him that, listen, I think there's something wrong with you, you're a sick person. Instead of preferring women, you prefer men, and you're a man. He will look at you in the face and tell you that he might be a joker because he is perfectly a normal human being. Now, if someone who is perceived by society as abnormal says he's normal, then what is our definition of what constitutes normal, healthy behavior? That is the weakness of the pathological definition as well. And you look at the sociological definition, it says deviation from the norms of society, and that has a problem as well. Because the norms of society, they change from time to time, from place to place, and they change under certain circumstances. So the assumption is that if we adopt the sociological definition, the field of social deviance that we study from, that perspective would be very wide. And that has been the problem for that definition as well. Now, when you look at those definitions and you apply them to the urban area, we can say that there are urban deviance from that perspective. Or statistically, you can say that professionals are above average. If there are professional people who normally do the right things, or they do even better than the right thing, they are above average people, and you can find such professionals in the urban communities. Similarly, you can find sinners, if you like, the criminals in the urban communities as well. So statistically speaking, we can say that there is a representation of that category of people in the urban areas. Legally speaking, the breaking of the laws of society, which will lead to punishment if you committed rape, if you committed armed robbery, if you committed burglary, if you committed, if you stole something, or you were corrupt, you embezzled funds, you evaded tax. All of these are legal breaches which constitute crimes. And there are a lot of people in the urban areas who are doing that, they've done that, they're currently doing that. And there are pathological deviants as well, particularly those who have mental problems because of the frustrations of the urban area. You find them in the streets, they just can't cope with reality. So there are pathological deviants as well as sociological deviants. Well, sociological deviance can be explained from the fact that breaking the norms of society, the norms set aside for people in the various social statuses. For example, you're a husband, and you occupy the status of being a husband, and you don't conform to the norms expected of that status. If you're being an irresponsible husband, you are a sociological deviant. Or if you're a pastor, and the expectations of pastors is that they should be above board. They should be righteous people. But we find in the newspapers a lot of time that this pastor has done, this pastor has done, this. Sociologically speaking, there are all kinds of deviations from the norms set for people in their various social statuses. So basically, in the urban area, you can find these urban deviants. We have attempted to explain these deviations or crimes from a theoretical perspective. We can go straight to Robert Merton's theory of anomie. Now, Merton divided society into two categories, a dichotomy between, in society, divided into two. We have the cultural structure, which is made up of the cultural goals, the things worth striving for. And then we have the social structure, which is made up of the legitimate means to achieve the cultural goals. Now, anomie occurs if there is an acute disjunction between the cultural goals